My name is Chantel Campbell, and I am a business analyst with the MedSIS program, and I'm the lead on implementing the Royal College CBME module and then supporting it and then maintaining enhancements, so on and so forth. We wanted to have this session today, not necessarily to go through the dashboard. I think there's lots of resources available to you that take you in a fair amount of detail through the dashboard. So there's some recordings of, like live demos that I've done when we were back on campus. There's also a video that Allison has sent out a few times that's been posted online that goes through the entire dashboard, supporting docs, all of that information. And so I think that's a great resource. And there is also a user guide posted on our website that also will take you through how to navigate the dashboard. I really wanted to use the session today to try and answer some questions, maybe specifically about your program, or, if you're finding anything confusing. I'm also happy to take in feedback. All the feedback that I hear from people, I do take to the appropriate committees, and we kind of go through the list and prioritize enhancements, and I write up, requirement documents for them. We get them submitted and quoted and approved by appropriate committees for funding, and then we get those items scheduled for development with our programmers. So please also feel happy to chime in and provide any feedback. I'm going to share my screen here, so you can see the dashboard. I'm in one of our test environments, and so we have a fake resident here, so who's been registered in internal medicine. So I just wanted to be able to have the dashboard up for folks to be able to bring forward their questions, and hopefully I can navigate through the system and be able to maybe show you some things or how some things work, or if you have any questions. I'd also like to go through, I think most folks have already heard about most of our enhancements that are scheduled to come up, and maybe I can start with those to kind of get your gears going. But please feel free to either unmute and don't feel like you're interrupting, just unmute yourselves and chime in, or if you prefer to use the chat, I also have that open and can see the questions that are coming in that way. In terms of our upcoming enhancements, so these are lists of things that we're hoping to have completed in between now to the end of August. There's actually lots of things going on, but I think I'll just go through the most notable ones. The first one is the ability for residents to trigger a form and have the supervisor complete that form on their mobile device in one step. So this is eliminating the immediate email that would go to the supervisor. Supervisor would click on the link and they would open the form and complete it. Prior to July 1, so in the next couple of weeks, we should have the functionality where the resident can trigger the form. They can hand over their phone to the supervisor. Supervisor can fill it out and submit it. And what will happen is a follow-up email will come from the system to the supervisor to say, here's a link to an evaluation form that has been completed under your account. If you are not the person who has completed this form, please contact such and such, whatever we decide that email contact to be. So I think for anybody who already is CBD and transitioned into MedSIS last year, this will be a big improvement in comparison to the two-step acceptance or two-step submission on forms. For folks who are just starting in July, you're lucky and you'll never really have to use the two-step if you don't want. Both will be options. So if the resident wants to have the form completed in that moment, they can. If the resident chooses to email the form to the supervisor, they can. So we're actually just expanding the options for supervisors to complete forms. The next item we have for enhancement is aggregate reports. And so this is actually not part of the CBME module. It's just an enhancement to the system in general, but may be important to some of you folks. So there's two different components to this. One is that when a final evaluator or supervisor is going to complete an ITER on a resident, right now there's a little magnifying glass that comes up and you can click on it and you can see the other forms that have been completed on that resident during their rotation. We're just building in the functionality to be able to view those forms in aggregate. So if you have WBAs that your residents are completing and they have to get a certain number of a particular WBA completed, instead of looking at each individual WBA, you'll be able to look at an aggregate version. That's currently under development. The other thing is sometimes programs have to have several ITERs completed throughout the rotation. So you might not just have a mid and a final, you might actually have weekly ITERs that the resident is triggering to have their weekly supervisor get completed. And again, the system will aggregate those forms as opposed to the final evaluator having to open each individual form. The other side to the aggregate reporting is more so for program directors and program administrators. So soon you'll be able to go into your evaluation schedule and there will be a button that you can click that says aggregate forms. And basically what you would do is you would search up your resident, you would click on the forms that you want to be aggregated and click the button and it would aggregate it for you. And there's a couple of different options. Again, if you're trying to look at ITERs in a certain way or WBAs in a certain way, you'll be able to pull those reports. The next thing coming up is we have enhanced our WBA functionality. And we plan to implement this probably over the next few weeks or early on in July. So a WBA is just looking at the chat, is a work-based assessment. So it's similar to a CBME form, but it's not necessarily connected or linked to an EPA. So there are several programs, CBME and traditional streams, using these work-based assessments, and they're just a quick, short assessment form. Some programs, like I want to say, some of the pathology programs, like they have a WBA that is about like an autopsy report. So it's just a quick, details that they have to fill in and be assessed on an autopsy report. If you're like in the OB program, maybe you have like a birth report or something like that, where you can get a quick evaluation filled out. And they're basically meant to be similar to the CBME form. It's just a little piece. You're just assessing a little component and it's usually on the spot, the same as the CBME form, except it's not used for EPAs. It can be used for other program requirements. Programs who are in the traditional stream who wanted to prep for CBME also took advantage of the WBA forms to trial a couple generic EPAs. So we use the WBA almost as a CBME form, and those programs gave us maybe like 3 generic EPAs. We created them on the form and they got their residents triggering the WBA forms. And this was to like prep their faculty a little bit into how to give these little bits of feedback more often. So the enhanced WBA is, we're more so referring to it as a daily assessment. It was originally implemented for emergency medicine and anesthesia because their evaluations are very shift-based. And so the enhanced functionality allows a resident or supervisor to trigger the form and can also tie a faculty evaluation to it. So for example, emerge, they could trigger the daily assessment, the faculty evaluation would come up, the resident would complete it, and then the daily assessment form would come up for the supervisor to complete. and they would be getting these forms completed every day, every shift. And so they would have several forms completed throughout a rotation. And this is also where the aggregate comes in handy. So what they're doing right now is collating these forms and giving them to the person who is the final evaluator, and they're using those forms to inform the ITER. And so basically the system now will collate, aggregate all of these forms and automatically have them available to the final evaluator to view in an aggregate version. So if anybody is looking, communication, once this stuff is fully implemented, communication will go out to programs about like new tools or new things that we have available. And if your program is looking to take advantage of those, you can email us and inquire about, what tools would work for you. So if you have something like a shift eval or a daily eval or something short that gets completed more often and you're looking to take advantage of the enhanced WBA, then you can get in touch with us. So the enhancement is basically that the WBA can be triggered by both resident and supervisor. Before, only the resident could trigger it. The added ability to add a faculty evaluation to it, that was not previously there. And then also to have the immediate email link. So if we decide at the PG level to turn on the one-step acceptance for WBAs, we can do that. Otherwise, we leave it as the immediate email link that goes to the supervisor. Previously, the WBA would get sent and the supervisor would only be notified on like Wednesdays and Fridays when the mass email notifications go out about pending ITERs and WBA forms. So this is just making a little bit more quick and a little bit more interactive, and allowing the ability for supervisors to complete or provide feedback to the resident kind of on the spot, as opposed to waiting a couple of days to get a notification. So I think that takes care of the one-step submission, aggregate reports, and the enhanced WBA functionality. Another thing that we are implementing is we in MedSIS refer to it as a requirement checklist, but I think in PG they're referring it to a competence committee dashboard. And some of you that are on this meeting might already, we had a couple of working group meetings about this, and some folks who are part of that might be here right now. And we're basically creating a dashboard that will help facilitate your competence committee meetings. The flow of information, the housing of information, the ease of being able to look at documents that are specifically related to a competence committee review, a one place to house the information, to be able to see kind of how your resident progressed or what the decision making was at those specific meetings. So I can show you what that looks like. This is just a mock-up screen of that. Sorry, I'm just seeing the chat right now. I don't have anything in the system yet to be able to show for the other items. So the passive or the one-step submission, the aggregate, and the daily assessments. But I do have a stage or phase 1 version of the requirement checklist or competence committee dashboard. So it will look similar to this. It will be program specific. So programs can create a review. So you can see PGY1 Portfolio Review 1. That's what this program has named their competence committee meeting or review. Then the program can identify what needs to go into a review, what is being reviewed, what are the documents, does the coach have to do a coach report? Does the resident have to do a resident reflection? Is there a competence committee letter that is going to be sent to the resident or uploaded in here? So you would come up with the steps or requirements or things that are being reviewed. You would add a person who is accountable for that step. So, if there has to be a resident reflection, then the resident would be responsible for that. If there has to be some kind of document on learning goals and the coach is responsible, you would assign that. So the program's coming up with the steps and they're coming up with who is responsible. Then you can also add templates. So if the program had a template document for reflections, they could upload that here. And if they had a template for the report that the coach is supposed to provide, they could upload it here. And then basically they would apply this review template to all of their residents. Or you could pick which residents it's going to be applied to. So basically then each of your residents would have a review that looks like this, and the templates would be here. So now the coach and the program and the committee can see all the steps that need to be taken, who is responsible. The templates are there. The templates can be downloaded and filled in and re-uploaded. And so once the committee goes through a review period, they can see that everything's been done, uploaded, decisions have been made, competence committee letter has been uploaded. We did decide to add a few more drop downs about the purpose of the meeting, decision that came from the meeting, status, overall status of the resident for the particular meeting. So we'll be updating this to include those as well. And then when your resident is on to their next review, again, you would have all of the steps, who is responsible, the templates available for the accountable people to download and fill out. So basically, as time is going by, you know, if you have a 3-year program, at the end of the 3 years, if you have to have 2 reviews on a resident per year, you're going to see all 6 reviews in the exact same dashboard, all documentation that goes along with it, decision-making statuses, and all of those details. And some programs will have the same review process for every review, but my understanding is that review processes can change depending on where the trainee is at in their program. So as part of the first review, you might only have 2 or 3 things that you're looking at and need to review. But maybe if they're in their 2nd or 3rd year, or closer to, you know, finishing residency, there might be a more in-depth review or more details or more documentation to look at. In any case, the program has the flexibility to dictate what each review looks like. And then if you have a resident who needs an additional review, then you can add that in there as well for one particular resident. Or if you have particular steps that need to be added for a resident, you can go in and you can edit their specific dashboard. So say as part of PGY1 Portfolio Review 1, you had a resident who was in remediation and there were various remedial expectations or documentation that needed to be reviewed as part of the competence committee review. You could add that step in here as a requirement and upload the documentation in here. So everything that's required for the review would live in one place. Is there any questions about this one? We're hoping this one is going to be implemented in August. So the first program that we'll be pushing it out for is family medicine, and then probably a couple of weeks or a few weeks later, we'll push it out to the rest of the Royal College programs. Okay. Next enhancement is enhancements on the learner summary report. So if folks are not available with the learner summary report, I'm just going to go on our MedSIS website in the CBME section, and I'm going to pull an example of the report. So this is what we have available for all of the Royal College programs. They have the ability to run a learner summary report on their resident. And it's basically pulling in all of the details from the dashboard and putting them in one place. You can see, you know, how they're progressing on each EPA, the milestones, and a summary of how they've been assessed, and all the collated comments for all of the EPAs. We also have an aggregate of the ITERs and the collated version of the comments. You can see, you know, they've got 2 ITERs that were a 4 out of 4. Here's the 2 ITERs when they were completed, who completed them. It also pulls in the activity log for programs who are using it event attendance for folks that are using the event manager, and a summary of the faculty evaluations that have been sent to residents to complete for their clinical rotations. So you'll be able to see, they've completed all of their clinical faculty teaching evaluations or not. A few things that are being enhanced for this report are being able to pull it by date range. So that was a big one. So right now the report is cumulative. It just shows from day 1 to now. And folks are really trying to look at, what has been completed since our last competence committee. So we're adding that in there. And we're also adding some flexibility to look at the data in different ways. So everything in this report is basically an aggregate. Some folks want to see things in a collated version. So show me the ITERs collated, or show me all of the EPA forms collated, like a list of each individual forms. And the reason for that was that if you look at this example here, EPA 3, there could be, that's not a good example of one, but so this one. EPA 1, you can see the breakdown here and the comments, but some programs want to know like which comments are going with which score. So, did you give a 5 out of 5, but the comments aren't kind of reflecting that score? And so we're basically just building a level of flexibility that allows you to pull this report in different ways, and also by time frame. So I think one of our goals for this report is just to continue layering on top of it. I think the end game is to have all data that exists on the resident in the MedSIS system be pulled into one report, or be very easily reported on. Something else that came up that we haven't approved and pushed forward and that sort of thing, but some feedback was, can we put a summary of the evaluations that have been completed on a resident for the resident doing presentations? So if your program's using the event manager and maybe your resident has to do some type of leadership presentation or rounds presentation, they are the presenter, and everybody else completes faculty evaluations or presenter evaluations on that resident. And some of the EPAs are about leadership or presenting. And so right now your program administrator would have to go into our reporting tool and pull out those details and, either upload it to supporting documentation or find another way to get it to the committee to be able to review that. So that's just an example of, is there a way that we can automatically get it pulled into here so folks can really get a global sense of how this resident is performing in all aspects of assessment that are available in MedSIS. Okay, I think that's it for the learner summary report. And the last enhancement that should be done in August, although I really haven't started kind of working on writing up the document and really understanding the requirements, is for multi-source feedback. So there are EPAs that are specific to multi-source feedback in MedSIS, and right now we don't have any true multi-source feedback functionality. So right now, if you have an EPA and it's for multi-source feedback, residents can trigger the multi-source feedback Form 3 form. Supervisors can fill it out and complete it, but the resident will be able to see what has been written on it by that individual person. So right now there's a disclaimer on the form. So when an evaluator receives that form, it says this form is not anonymous. The resident will be able to see what has been written in the form and who the evaluator is, just to protect themselves if they choose to fill it out or not. But what ideally we would like is that either the resident can trigger multi-source feedback forms, supervisors can trigger multi-source feedback forms, programs can send out multi-source feedback forms on behalf of a learner for particular EPAs. And then once those forms are being completed to meet a minimum requirement, does there have to be 3 forms completed or 4, however many it is for that EPA, to collate them and anonymize them, and then spit out a report that the resident would be able to have access to, and the program and coach and committee and so on and so forth. So right now, the multi-source feedback form works exactly like any other Royal College form. It gets triggered, it gets completed, and right away the resident can see the feedback. We're trying to enhance that functionality specific for multi-source feedback. So I think that's it for the enhancements that we have coming up. I also just want to direct you to our MedSIS website. So any resources that we have available for honestly anything in MedSIS, not even just CBME, can be found on our MedSIS website. So it's healthsci.mcmaster.ca/MedSIS. And if you come under this training section, you can see like there's generic PG postgrad stuff, like about ITERs and rotation schedules and that sort of thing. Then there's a section specific to CBME. And everything is sorted by audience. So these are all the materials and resources we have for residents that have to do with CBME. We have everything for PDs, PAs, coaches, and committees. And, we try to keep these resources as updated as possible. So if you're ever looking for something that has to do with MedSIS, by all means, you can start here. I think most of our functionality is documented either in a guide or in a video. Okay, so I'll close out of that and I will come back to the dashboard. And I'm just gonna open up for folks to have questions and about anything. It can be about the enhancements, the dashboard, feedback, but I'll just open it up.
Hi, Chantel, it's Lisa.
Hi.
Hi, one of the things that has come up as I've been attending different competency committees and meeting with programs is from this view, how most easily can they dive deeper into an individual trainee profile, and particularly the attempt breakdown. Sometimes that visual is a little problematic for people new to the system, and how they can kind of pull up the EPA graph and the milestone graph and the spider graph to kind of get a visual of progress over a period of time.
Okay. So if we're looking at this particular resident, sorry, I might need to refresh here. If we're looking at a particular resident, basically the hierarchy is that there is a stage, and within the stage are the EPAs, and then within each EPA are the requirements that the resident needs to meet in order to achieve that EPA. I'm hoping that this is gonna work for me here. Okay. So we're in stage 2 right now, or this particular resident is in stage 2. And so you can see their overall progress for stage 2 is 79%, and their progress for EPA 1 initial assessments is 96%. These are all the individual requirements that the resident needs to meet. And so you can see for the most part, they have done so. These progress bars, again, are only progressing when the resident receives a 5 out of 5 on that assessment form. So the overall entrustment scale 1 to 5, they have to have a 5 out of 5. Otherwise, they could do a fever 5 times. If they don't get a 5 or they get less than a 5, this bar is not going to progress anywhere. Over here on the number of attempts, so you can click on the number of attempts and it will pull up all of the forms that have been completed for this particular EPA. So you can see the rotations they've completed on, and the date it's been completed, who completed it, and if I click view, it will open up the individual assessment form. The attempt breakdown, again, is a representation of the entrustment scale that exists on a Form 1 and Form 2. And you can click on any of these. So the yellow here would be the resident was assessed as a 3 out of 5. And you could click there and it will show you that particular form. So you can see which exactly, the details of the form where they received the 3 out of 5. So you can click on any of these. Then you can also click on any of these progress bars. So if you want to see, okay, well, show me the form where they got the fever and they were marked as achieved. You can click on the percentage bar and it will show you the form that was completed for the fever. And you can open that and review it. I'm just not opening the forms because there's nothing in there for people to see in this test system. So so it is interactive and you can drill down and see all of the details. You know, show me the 5s, show me the 4s, show me the 3s, or show me, you know, the individual forms on chest pain, shortness of breath, so on and so forth. If you click on the EPA itself, the progress bar here, it will bring up an EPA summary. This is showing the monthly average score that the resident has received on their EPA forms or CBME forms for this particular EPA. So we're looking at initial assessments, and in July of last year, their average score was a 3 out of 5. Looks like they didn't get any forms over August, September, October, November, but in December, January, February, March, up until now, they were receiving a 5 out of 5 on average for the forms that they were getting completed. If I go into the EPA milestones, this is showing a summary of how the milestones were assessed for this initial assessments EPA. So you can see on the left is a list of the milestones, and then you can see the bar graph is showing how many times was this milestone assessed as not observed, how many times was it assessed as in progress, and how many times was it assessed as achieved. And so you'll be able to see either where your resident is not having certain important milestones observed, and also where they might still have some in progress, you know, potentially lacking or need more forms completed or need to, you know, perform better on particular milestones. If we click on the EPA assessment forms tab, again, it's just pulling up the total number of forms that have been completed for that particular EPA. Okay. Something else I'll point out is that the EPA names that are here listed in the dashboard are the short version. So a short version was identified by Royal College for each EPA. But if you click on the little blue info button here, you can see what the full title of the EPA is and the key features. So you just have a better sense of what's involved in the EPA. And then if we click on the stage itself, so I'm looking at stage 2 foundations of discipline now. So we just double clicked on the EPA. That's what gave us the graphs that I was just showing you. And now we'll double click on the stage progress bar. And this is going to give you a graph that is showing you cumulative over time, the number of forms your resident is receiving as achieved with the score of 5 out of 5. So hopefully this loads. If there are less than 10 EPAs in a stage, the graph will show up as a spider chart. And if there's more than 10 EPAs in the stage, then the graph will show up as a bar graph. Maybe I'll try refreshing my screen here. Again, I'm just in our test environment, which is not always as functional as our true MedSIS environment. In any case, I have something on our website that I can show you. So here's an example that is showing you the progress over time. So I know the lines on the spider chart look very faint, but basically what we have on the outside is the names of the EPA. So initial management, initiating resuscitation, basic procedures, handover. And then we have numbers here going from the center to 1, 2, and 3. And so for the period of April and May 2019, you could see that they got 3 5 out of 5 forms, like 3 achieved forms on Hanover. They got none on patient family updates. They got 1 on initial management. They got 3 on initiating resuscitation, and they got 2 on basic procedures. So then, going over time from June, July, you can see now they've got additional forms achieved for initial management. They went from having 0 forms as achieved for patient families to now having 2. And then same over here for initiating resuscitation. So basically, the way the spider chart should work is that each new layer of period of time should grow bigger and bigger. So in the first period of time, you would see few achieved forms for each of the EPAs. But as this resident is moving through their stage, the idea is that they would get more and more achieved forms. This graph might not be the most useful for stages 1 and maybe 4. I'm not sure how long people's stage 4 is usually, but for the longer stages where a resident is going to be in it for a year or longer, I think that's when these charts will become most valuable. If your stage is only a couple of months or 3 months long and the resident only has to get a limited amount of observations, the spider chart might not be helping you all that much to identify their progress. If I'll just show you example of the, okay, so this spider chart is working now. So again, you could see the number of EPA or the EPAs on the outside, and then they have August to November, December to March, and April to June. It's basically pulling it in every 3 months. And then I'll show you an example of the bar graph. So this is if there are 10 or more EPAs in the stage. It's showing you how many forms were marked as achieved. And so the 2 time periods for this example, I put May and June. So in May, they had 1 form for transport. They didn't get any in June. For vulnerable patients, they had 3 forms in June that were marked as achieved. If we look at this advanced procedures part B, it looks like they got 1 form as achieved in May, and then they got 2 in June. So basically they should be, doing better over time, getting more achieved forms scored as a 5 out of 5 over time. And so these graphs are available by double clicking on the stage, and it will auto determine if there are less than 10 EPAs. It will show you a spider chart. If there are more than 10 EPAs, it will be displayed as a bar graph.
That's excellent, Chantel. Is there a way, in addition to the deep dive into each trainee, is there a way to quickly look at how many EPAs have been completed and how many are outstanding?
Yeah, so the program will have to maintain, programs are kind of functioning in different ways. So if we go over here to the EPA statuses, you can see that there's various statuses. They go from pending to in progress to ready to review. And those 3 statuses are auto-calculated by the system based on, pending is they haven't even started it, in progress is they've begun to collect their forms, and ready to review means, they have collected the number of forms required for the EPA. And then it would be up to the program to mark an EPA as achieved. And that is at the decision of the competence committee. And then those decisions get ratified at RPC. And once that committee approves it, then the program would need to come back in and mark these approved. I think in most cases, the program administrator is maintaining these statuses and actually physically going in and clicking the buttons, but usually at the, you know, the decisions are being made by the committees. If you wanted your competence, you know, assigned competence committee member or chair or PD to be going in and updating these, that's fine. But in any case, they do manually need to be maintained by the program. And this is where you could tell by these statuses where the EPA is at. So you can see EPA 1 initial assessments has already been ratified by RPC and approved. We can see for EPA 2 here, part A, B, and C, they've been marked achieved. So the competence committee has marked them achieved, but they still need to go to RPC. In progress here for consulting others, you can see is in progress. So the resident is only at 40% completion for this EPA. So it's still in progress. Yeah, and so that's how you can probably most simply identify which EPAs have been marked or that are the resident should still definitely be working on.
Thank you. I have one more, and then it would be great to open it up for others to chime in. Another one that keeps coming up is as the trainee is moving through their current stage, and they may have 1, 2, or some EPAs or part of EPAs pending, but the decision is to, based on the review of that, the decision is to progress them to next stage based on all of the composite data, the narrative and what's showing in the EPAs currently. There may be some reassignment of a milestone or more to their dashboard so that it's left pending and yet to be achieved. Can you speak to that?
Yep. So basically all of the decision making is in the hands of the competence committee and the RPC. So if a resident, you know, might be sitting, their EPA could be sitting at 80%, but based on other, you know, supporting documents or supplementary data, the committee decides, you know, this should be approved or achieved and approved, then they can go and do that. The percentages don't have to reflect 100%. I'm sure there's various reasons as to why you would mark a resident achieved. You know, it could just be that the rotation or something they were on is not necessarily going to allow them 100% of that exposure, and you know, you're okay with it sitting at 90% for this particular resident. On the flip side, an EPA could be at 100%. They've done everything that is required of them, but the committee still feels, based on review and of data, so on and so forth, that they're not quite ready for this resident to be marked achieved for this EPA. And they may want to add additional requirements for a particular EPA. So if we went into this initial assessments here, you know, it says collect 10 observations of achievement. Programs do have the ability to go in and click this little add button. It's a little bit tedious, and so if anybody is trying to do this, feel free to email us and let us know. But you could create a new requirement for this resident that is similar to one of the requirements that we have here, which is called an EPA assessment. And you would put in the description. So if you wanted them to collect 5 more observations, you could do that. This is where it gets a little bit finicky with trying to input how you go about this functionality. This is why we haven't advertised it a ton, and we typically let programs come to us and utilize us to help them get these things set up. But it's basically allows you to create a requirement based on the case mix, based on the observer role. Like, we want you to do 2 more assessments from faculty. location of the patient visit. You know, we want you to get a couple more in the emergency department. You can do that, and you can say the number that they have to get is 3. You can say, you know, we need at least 2 different people evaluating you. And you can save that information out, and it will become a new requirement for this resident.
So if there was feedback from the RPC for an enhanced education plan, is this a mechanism to use to enter those things into the system of what the expectations might be?
Yeah, and so I mean, it depends, I think, on, I guess, what the education plan is, because this is an EPA
Right.
dashboard. So I mean, this is set up really to pull in the EPA's or anything that has to do with an EPA. However, we do have the ability to put requirements in the dashboard that okay, so I'll just show you. You can see I've added this one, collect 5 more, and you can see, you know, it's going to 0% here. So if it's in this individual assessment column, it means it's been added by the program for this resident to complete. So this would be auto-calculated by the system. We also have requirements in here, and we call them yes, no, or external requirements, where you could say, like, completion of a report is something that you ask the resident to do. And you could save this, and it would also become something additional that this resident needs to do. And so they would just go in here and they would be able to mark things as complete and save them out. And so you would be able to keep track of that.
And same for selecting milestone assessment. If there were issues noted on some of the non-medical expert roles, like communicator, collaborator, they could be added on those particular milestones under that EPA.
Exactly. So you could go in here and you could choose the particular milestone that you want them to have assessed and how many evaluations they should have assessed, or how many evaluations they should have completed on them for it.
That's excellent. I think that's functionality that we can look to promote in the most easiest way to do that, because I think it can be quite helpful from what I've observed. Recognizing too that this is it's a pretty complex system, and maybe participants today have varying levels of experience with it. So I wanted to just, you know, we've taken a deeper dive here. I just wanted to back it out and let the participants speak and ask questions even on some of the basic starting points with it.
For sure.
Thank you. That was excellent.
No problem. Does anybody have other questions?
Sure. People can always submit questions after the fact. I think it's always been a benefit to spend some time inside, really looking through the different views and the functionality, especially with enhancements coming. So if people start to do that, particularly those programs that are now going to launch and move into running competency committees outside of their trial environment, and really start to make use and fill the dashboard, that you're so accessible to the programs. You've been fantastic that way. So the support is there. I just wanted to reinforce that. And if there are continuing questions about the dashboard or functionality, please share that. As Chantel said, we do bring this to committee levels to review and support the best use of the dashboard. And we'll move into that in a more systematic way with our evaluation committee launching in a couple weeks, where we'll start to look at what is the data telling us and how can we best support efficient and good data in to make good data available for competency committees and faculty. Thanks, Chantel. This was excellent.
No problem. Thank you.